Well, good evening. I call the regular meeting of the Ames City Council for Tuesday, January 9th to order. First meeting of the new year. Welcome, Council, and those in attendance. We're going to start off tonight by reading a proclamation before we get on with the consent. Slavery and Human Trafficking Prevention Month. Whereas the United States was founded upon the principle that all people are created with the inalienable right to freedom and added the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, making slavery illegal. And whereas slavery within the United States today is the most often found in the form of forced labor and sex trafficking, which weakens our social fabric, increases violence and organized crime, and debases our humanity, this heinous crime is found within our own community. And whereas every business, community, organization, faith community, family, and individual can make a difference by choosing products that are not made by forced labor, by working to protect our young people from sexual exploitation, by addressing the problem of internet sex trafficking and pornography, and by becoming more aware of the problem and possible solutions. Therefore, I, John A. Hala, Mayor of the City of Ames, Iowa, do hereby proclaim January 2024 as Slavery and Human Trafficking Prevention Month. I encourage all of our residents to become more informed on this growing problem, to be vigilant and report suspicious activity, and to work towards solutions to end trafficking in all of its forms in our community. If you see something that doesn't look right, please take action and call the National Human Trafficking Hotline at 888-373-7888. It's my pleasure to introduce, and he's already known in our community, Dr. George, and he's going to share a few things, and also he's brought a friend, Kayleen, with him. So,
George Belitzos, I'm representing the Iowa Network Against Human Trafficking and Slavery, and also speaking tonight in gratitude to the council and to the mayor for once again acknowledging how serious a problem we have with human trafficking, not only worldwide, in the United States, in the state of Iowa, but in our own community. I'm also thanking you on behalf of all the agencies that locally are either trying to prevent or human trafficking or serving survivors of trafficking. And I'm joined here tonight by Kayleen, who is representing Wings of Refuge. Wings of Refuge is new to Ames. They started actually as the first residential program in Iowa for human trafficking survivors. And they started in, wasn't it? What city was it? Iowa Falls. And then they decided they would move their program to Ames. And they have two facilities in Ames. And I want you all to know that Thursday, when the governor proclaims the month of January as Human Trafficking Prevention Month, just as you have here in our city, and we're grateful for that again. Wings of Refuge is going to be recognized by the governor and by the state of Iowa with an outstanding anti-trafficking service award. They are the oldest residential program in the state. There are now 8 programs. They're all nonprofits. None of these programs get state funding. We're working hard with the legislature to get an appropriation for some state funding. They're all funded by donations, strictly by donations. They have 2 facilities right here in Ames. One of the facilities, because of underfunding, they can't staff, so really just operating one right now. But it's a great program, and I'm very proud of this. Just heard an announcement that they are the first program in the state of Iowa serving survivors that has received national accreditation. Don't you think they deserve a round of applause? Just to give you a very quick update on what's happening in Iowa since the last time we were here. We have seen just a tremendous increase in the number of survivors and rescues and prosecutions, not only here in Iowa, but all across the world. I'm also now serving as vice chair of an international anti-slavery board, and we have people represented on the board from 5 continents. The number of people who are being caught up in human trafficking, either sex or labor trafficking, is now standing at 50 million. A $10 million or 10 million person increase in victims as compared to just before COVID. And it is because there are so many more vulnerable people in this world who are being trapped by these traffickers. At any given time, night or day, there's 500,000 traffickers on the internet trying to groom vulnerable people. We have now had a second arrest for trafficking, and here in Ames in Story County, this individual has now been moved to federal court for being trafficked, being held for trial in the federal court for trafficking. We had in the last few years, I'll finish with this, Mr. Mayor, we've had 23 convictions. Last year, we got the legislature to increase the conviction and the years of prison for those who are trafficking minors. In the last 3 years, out of those 23 that have been convicted, half of them were trafficking minors in our state. And we just got the legislature to make it up to a life in prison being allowed. So things, they're coming down much harder on these traffickers. When I became chair of the Network Against Human Trafficking, we developed some posters, and this was one of the posters. Every 30 seconds, another person becomes a victim of human trafficking. This was 6 years ago. It's now every 5 seconds. That's worldwide. Thank you again. Thank you, Council, for recognizing the growing problem of trafficking and for making this Human Trafficking Prevention Month.
We'll move on now to consent agenda. Council, does anyone want to pull any item from consent?
Request that we pull item 5, please.
Item 5. Anything else? Hearing none, or entertain a motion to approve consent less item number 5.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
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 Okay.
So I asked about pulling item 5 so that we can find out how these records compare and these violations compare to some of the others that we've seen before, since some had 3 premise violations, 3 involved fake IDs. How is this different? And I understand the chief's not here, but
Yeah, I'm
would you
sorry.
be able to speak to that?
I don't have, I think the chief's analysis is that this is different.
Okay.
It doesn't rise to the same level of the magnitude of some of the other situations you've had.
Okay.
And we try to give the people a chance to correct their actions, take those special activities that we've suggested for them to prove their record on this. So I think they feel comfortable extending it this time, but we'll put them on notice.
Okay. Thank you. Then I move approval of agenda item 5.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
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 All right, we'll move on to public forum. This is the time we set aside for comments from the public on topics of city business other than those listed on the agenda. We ask people to limit their comments to 3 minutes or less if they would. And we'll go ahead and start with Richard. I see you're already up.
The goal meeting on Saturday, there wasn't any time for public comment on it at all. And it's not, I wasn't even allowed 3 minutes, but I probably talked up more that was individually that, and it's like, I don't know. It's like, I don't know that it's necessarily a good thing to have that. It's like, I don't know. You allow 3 minutes here, and it's like I don't even get to do that. And sometimes, and I don't know. It's like I wanted to say, some of the things about how the climate action plan and everything, how it's all done by computers. And it's like all those things are done by computers, and it's like you mentioned it there. And it's like, I'm very scared of technology. I filed a bunch of Freedom of Information Act requests with a lot of the agencies of the federal government to prove their computers are safe from computer viruses and things like that. And this is 40 years ago, 30 years ago. And they say those things are personal. And I think there's nothing more impersonal than computers generally, and it's like they try to get them to behave like people. And it's like, I'm scared to death of those things. And I know a lot of people that at Iowa State say that it's like, I should be scared to death of them, but it's like they don't listen to me. And it's like Einstein used to say, I'm God, when other scientists would present him theories of the universe. And it's
Richard,
their own words, it's to create the world where the living would wish they were dead.
Richard, I appreciate your comments on the regarding the meeting. Okay, we have Grant Olson. You signed up. We'll get to you, sir, next.
Grant Olson, 3812 Ontario Street. And with me tonight is one of my sons. He is a resident of Ames just as much as I'm a resident. And about 6 years from now, he and his classmates will study government, and they'll likely look at decisions that council and staff will make this year and study the speed at which work occurs this year to make Ames a better place. They'll study if the difficult and necessary policy decisions were made to change the way streets look to make Ames safer and more comfortable for all ages and abilities to move around. Move around using transportation modes that have lower carbon output than the personal automobile. The adoption of the bicycle and pedestrian plan will be followed by implementation. Will there be a philosophy of lighter, quicker, cheaper interim fixes to street layout? Or will changes be delayed until the street segment appears on the capital improvements plan? We will make choices this year that will affect my son's generation and future generations. What kind of legacy do we want to leave? Evaluate, adjust, and repeat those two items with urgency. That's the kind of legacy to leave.
Thank you, Grant. Anybody else? If you would just state your name and then you may begin.
My name is Greg Carlson, and I don't give up very easy. I proved that in Palmyra, Wisconsin. They used to go, when they plowed the roads, they'd go down one side and they'd get 2/3 of all the roads, and they did it for several years. And I put up with it my first 2 years in Palmyra, and finally I started coming to these kind of meetings in a much smaller town atmosphere. And after a half a dozen or so meetings, they decided that they do it in altering ways. And I was just ecstatic, because I used to shovel 2/3 of the snow out of my driveway, when now it was more even keel. And the reason that I'm here today is partly because of the snow. And I've been here almost 3 years, and there's snow that gets pushed from a big fancy pusher that's owned by a private company. They push the snow across the road into my neighbor's right away. They also push the snow to the south of them into that neighbor's right away. After he pushed the snow into the right of way, he used his plow to put his snow into my driveway. I had the police come. They shrugged their shoulders. Oh, well, there's no regulation against him putting it in. I said, but it got in my driveway. And actually, the driveway that it went near, I helped that fella shovel his driveway so he could get to work. He's a cook at a restaurant. So I hope that someday that either the pushers can be licensed, or that they can keep their snow on their right of way. Because I'm sure there's situations that it's safety's a concern. There was no safety for a concern. He could have easily, right now as we speak, there's not one bit of snow in his 200 feet of right of way. None. It's all on other people's property. Mostly right of way. Some in my driveway, some still in my neighbor's driveway. He hasn't gotten home yet. And the other people shoveled their driveway. But, and I want to say one other thing. If I got 2 minutes, it'll be real quick. I went to the construction site, trailer one. I don't even remember if it might have been around lunchtime. Sometimes I take a nap after lunch, but there was 3 or 4 or 5 people in the trailer. There hadn't been any work happen across at the plaza in a couple of months. It was either near the end of August or the 1st of September. They were having donuts, drinking coffee, and laughing. And what I want to say about that is I learned that the trees that were going to be planted out there were going to be 3 inches in diameter. They're now going to be 1.5 inches in diameter because basically of mismanagement. And I don't think that the taxpayers or the taxpayers' youth should suffer from the shade that is limited, because I understand that these managers still have their job in Ames. And I'm proposing that they put together some kind of a so that they could donate their personal funds to change some of those trees from 1.5 inches back to 3 inches. That would make the managers feel good. All the little kids would have less. I mean, the atmosphere's thin up there, and moms can hardly control the little kids, and to have to coat them with that stuff because we don't get the 3-inch trees.
Thank
So
you.
there you go. You,
Thank you.
I appreciate you giving me a few minutes. I
Thank you.
thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Is anybody else? All right, we will close public forum. We'll move on to item number 12, staff report regarding climate action plan and 7 initial implementation steps.
Good evening. We are gathered today to talk about the climate action plan and city-led initiatives that have developed since the council accepted the plan in June. Tonight, we're going to summarize the 7 implementation steps, and you'll have the opportunity to ask any questions. I thought it might be helpful to do a little bit of research and timeline just to acclimate everybody and get everybody, get some context to what we're talking about. So in 2007 was the first time that I could find sustainability listed on the city council goals. And at that point, these are listed from oldest to newest. We were going to commit to making Ames a more environmentally sustainable community. It transitioned into a Go Green initiative. Then it was supporting environmental sustainability, expanding environmental sustainability, and where we are now in 2024, of valuing environmental sustainability. And my point in doing that is this isn't new. This is 15 years now that we have had this value. And I think that it's really something that the city has embraced both in our organization and throughout the community. Just a little bit of a timeline more recently. In 2020, we completed the greenhouse gas inventory. That was the community-wide baseline. We worked with Pale Blue Dot from Minnesota, and we looked at aggregated numbers of electricity, gas, water, wastewater, transportation, like vehicle miles traveled, and waste. So we needed to have that aggregated information to basically have a starting point so we could measure our progress. In 2021, we worked with Sustainability Solutions Group, SSG, to come up with a climate action plan. We presented a draft plan in April of last year, and you accepted the plan in June. So there's a lot of numbers involved in climate action planning and a lot of the steps that we're taking. And I just wanted to, again, clarify the goal has changed a little bit. When we first started this process, we had the council decided on this very aspirational goal of 83% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from that 2018 baseline by 2030 and net zero emissions by 2050. So when you accepted the plan in June, those numbers had shifted a little bit, sort of really after more of an understanding of what it was going to take to move the needle. 70% reduction in emissions and 94% reduction of emissions by 2050. So the report, the climate action plan, was based on the 6 big moves. We took those 6 big moves and we looked at them through the lens of 8 evaluation criteria. And then we came up with the 7 action or implementation steps. Lots of numbers. So the 6 big moves, just so you remember: building retrofits, net zero new construction, renewable energy, reducing vehicle emissions, increasing active transportation, and reducing waste. Those are the areas where you could make the most impact when you look at the steps under each one of those. And then the 7 action steps are why we're here tonight. So there's a lot of people here at the tables with me. We're each going to go through these steps, pretty high overview of the implementation steps that we have been suggesting to you, and just give you a sense of where we're at and give you an opportunity to ask any questions and provide any feedback. So I'll just introduce, I think you know everybody, but I think we're in order. Don. So our Climate Action Plan project team is Don Com, Joel Zook, Mary Rankin, who is ill today and not able to join us, and me. We lost Deb, but we will be joined by a new assistant soon. And then today with me is Kelly Diekman and Brian Phillips and Corey Mellis, who will go through the steps with you. Okay, I'll kick it off to Don.
Good evening, Mayor, council members, Donald Com, Director of Electric Service. So in step one, basically what we're looking at there, do we lose our screen?
Oh, I didn't know you needed it. Put it back.
All right, that's all right. So in step one, basically, electricity, what we use within the city represents about 40% of our carbon footprint. With that, then, we need to be looking at increasing our wind and solar generation, which are two of the prominent renewable energy resources. Within the report, you'll note that today, how we operate, we do have some green within our portfolio. So roughly about 18, it depends upon the time of the year and the month with how much wind is happening, but roughly between 18 and 20% of our energy is already green. And that's comprised of a 30 megawatt contract that we have for wind. We have a 2 megawatt solar farm that we built down near the airport. And then we also burn refuse-derived fuel, which is also considered green by many, and that produces an additional 4%. So roughly 18 to 20% of our energy is already green. One of the things that is shown in the report that we were given, or we gave to you, also then shows how much energy or how we produce the energy that is serving our customers here in the city. And roughly half of that energy does come from our power plant today. And as good stewards to the environment, rather than burying our waste, we find it better for the environment to burn that as refuse-derived fuel, taking out all of the recyclables, and that produces roughly half of our energy. The remaining energy then comes both from our contracts for wind and solar, and then we also purchase energy from what is called the grid or from the market, and that's where we get the remaining of our energy. As we move forward, there are several things that we're looking at, and I wanted to point out a few key aspects of this. First off, there are two things that we as a utility are working towards that we constantly have to meet. First is the capacity obligation, or the obligation that we have enough generation to meet our load at any given time. Typically, that type of generation is dispatchable generation, often fossil fuels, but the key note to that is it doesn't typically have to run, but we have to have the capability to start that generation if the demand is there and we don't have the wind and we don't have the solar to meet that. So that's on the capacity side. The other side, which is more important, which is what we're focusing today and moving forward, is how do we meet our energy requirements? When somebody turns on that light switch, where is that energy coming from? And that's what we're planning for in the months, years, and decades to come, is how do we transition from how we're producing power today to a more green, sustainable fuel source. There are basically three areas, or there are things that we've learned about this. First off, in general terms, bigger is cheaper. Bigger's better, bigger's cheaper. If you can build utility scale resources, they're oftentimes twice as cheap or 3 times cheaper than if you build it in a small scale. And that basically comes down to, if you can come in and put 1,000 solar panels in at a given take, you can do that cheaper than maybe putting up 10 here and 10 there. So that's one of the focuses that we're looking at. Wind, by its nature, is only today built. I shouldn't say only, because I can think of my grandpa's farm where he had his wind turbine up on there and was pumping water. But From a utility standpoint, wind is typically built on utility scale. And what I mean by utility scale is we're talking tens, if not 20s, 30s, 40s, and higher in megawatts. Let me pause there for a second and put that in perspective. Ames' overall load is about 138 megawatts. So when we say we're going to need 40 megawatts, that's a fairly sizable amount of energy compared to our overall load. The other thing that we're studying right now is it's called power purchase agreements versus ownership in some of these resources. And the best way I can kind of describe that would either be leasing a car versus owning a car, or paying rent versus owning a home. There are pros and cons to both. If you lease a car, the great thing is as technology changes, you just hand that car back, or you get, when your contract ends for wind or solar, you can move on to what the latest technology is, the latest capabilities. So that's a positive. The downside to that is one of the things that the federal government has started to offer now is with ownership, there are the equivalent of tax incentives. So by owning it, a lot of the federal projects will allow you to get some of that money back, typically about 30% of your investment. So these are some of the moving parts that we're looking at as we continue to fashion our generation resource mix in the years to come. Other aspects that we're studying is we still strongly believe in what we call retail solar. We've had over 200 of our customers install solar on their roofs. This has varied in size from a few kilowatts. I think our largest project was 312 megawatts. And that's a good addition. And as council knows, electric will be coming back to you in the near future when our cost of service study is done, so that we can show you how we're going to support and enhance. We've got some changes to our renewable retail solar program. I think I've covered quite a bit of it. Maybe I should.
Municipal buildings.
One of the things that we're looking at, thank you, Steve, is, so we're talking about residential solar. The other thing that we are looking at as kind of that mid-level is we've seen some preliminary pricing on putting solar on several municipal buildings. We've looked at the new water plant fleet and the electric distribution buildings as places to put solar. And we also have seen pricing. We have a closed landfill, and there are opportunities to make use of that land and put solar on there. And we're also looking at other sites within the city to provide solar. From a utility grade or from a higher level, from a larger, we are talking to several utilities and several companies that build these larger projects and are kind of in the works. It's not a fast process. As you start looking at larger solar and larger wind, there are many entities that get involved in this. So it's not just a city decision. It has to go through the state, and it also has to go through the regional transmission organization called MISO. And this takes several years to evaluate. So it's good that we're talking about this today with the idea or the intent to have more renewable generation within our portfolio, probably in the next 3 to 4 years. It'll take that long before we can make that type of a transition. Maybe I'll pause there. Are there questions from a step one standpoint?
I have a question for a clarification, I guess. You talked about the power purchase agreements. You've talked in the past and on the report here about MISO. You've also talked about the purchase of wind. How are these things connected to MISO? Are they all through that, or are these individual organized means of purchase that are not necessarily through MISO?
It's yeah, boy, that in and of itself is a complicated question.
Sorry.
So, no, that's okay. So we don't buy any of these products or any of this energy through MISO necessarily. Where MISO gets involved is, well, let me back up. Utility-sized wind and solar, it would be very difficult to build 40 megawatts of solar inside of Ames. We're talking 5 times 40, 200 acres of solar panels. I don't think we want to use Ames land to do that. So these utility-size projects would be built outside of Ames. The moment that happens is you need our transmission, plus you need the regional grid transmission to move that power or to absorb it into the system so that Ames can make use of that. MISO is that conduit, is that wire that gets it here. So MISO has a strong say in where wind goes, where solar goes, and how you get it here. It's not that they can necessarily say no, but I can envision a situation where, let's say, we build wind in Carroll County, and MISO will come back and say, your wind, Ames, is overloading facilities in Des Moines. So you need to make a $3 million investment in Des Moines so that your project covers its impacts on the greater grid. And that's the complexities of the study. And it's not just that they're looking at our project. There are hundreds of projects that they're studying at the same time to see who all has an impact. Did that answer your question?
Yes. So another question, in order to determine which buildings we're going to focus on, and you mentioned fleet services, the water plant, and is City Hall the third one?
Actually, electric distribution.
Electric distribution, okay. What was the study that was done to determine those three would be the buildings chosen?
Typically what we did, and this was several years ago, we looked at all of the city buildings and said, okay, we want to look at predominantly you want solar to be able to face south without being obstructed. You want bigger, more square footage to put solar panels on. That's what makes it cheaper. And we evaluated, we quickly looked at all of the city buildings, and it was those three that we settled on. City Hall could be another one. We've also talked more recently about the park across the street here. We've also talked in the future about the Fitch Aquatic Center.
I do want to make a distinction between those two. What we're looking at, and there's a distinction between us becoming a retail customer and that's just like a individual home. So our thought may be on the Fitch Family Aquatic Center that the project costs would pay for the solar panels, not the electric system. Therefore, like an individual homeowner, the benefit would go back to the operating budget of the aquatic center. Same thing across the street. That's a Parks and Rec facility. If the project pays for it, then the energy and all the benefits will go back to the operating costs there. That's very important, as you know, with the new state law that's going to put a crimp on our operating budgets for the general levy. It's important we deal with that. The other ones, which would be paid for other rooftop solars on municipal buildings, would actually be paid for the electric utility, and that energy goes into the system that all the customers benefit from. See what I mean? It's just like any other, just like our community solar farm or our wind farm. That's just energy that's inside, socialized into the total system. Understand the distinction?
Mm-hmm. And one other question. I think that you did a survey of electric use on city buildings. Is that correct?
So one of the things that we're looking at, and this impacts maybe even more than just step one, but when we start talking about step 5, there's a tremendous amount of value in doing detailed energy audits of any building. In this case, the municipal buildings, to say, all right, if we are going to reduce electric consumption, or if we're looking for that low-hanging fruit to allow us to electrify maybe some of the buildings or use electricity more wisely, that's something where we will go out and do more detailed audits in this coming year.
I think you've gotten ahead of me.
Okay.
I actually was just asking
Consumption.
something about, in here, there was something about just a list of the consumption of the various buildings of electric utility services. So,
Municipal buildings.
yeah,
Yeah, I guess I'm still thinking that's in the retrofitting portion of it.
No, just ask, do we have that information?
do we have
available?
that information? And could
Yes.
council
Yes.
see that information?
Yes,
That's my
we
question.
have that
Okay,
information. Yes.
thank you. And can council see it? May council see it?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Make sure. Request for Don.
Any other questions for Don? Thank you. Next. Step 2.
So I'll take step 2. Step 2 has a lot of moving parts to it with regard to the existing waste to energy system and ways in which the city impacts the handling of solid waste. There have, of course, been some changes over the past 50 years in our waste to energy system in terms of the technology that we use, and that has created some real constraints that we are faced with at the moment. In terms of making sure that that system is as reliable as possible and how it meets the climate goals that the council has adopted. So in the past couple of years, we've engaged in a study to evaluate alternatives to our existing system. And the struggle that we have here in this particular sector of our operation is that without reducing significantly the amount of natural gas that's consumed at the power plant, it's going to be difficult for us to achieve the goals that are outlined in the climate action plan. I think earlier in the document it indicates something like 45% would be the maximum greenhouse gas reduction that we could achieve without addressing the waste to energy system. So we have that challenge. There's no simple answer to make that impediment go away and to resolve that. So we have taken the approach of trying to identify alternatives to our existing system in order to achieve a greater reduction in greenhouse gases. And so there's really 3 basic alternatives that we need to evaluate further and understand. One is continuing to do what we're doing. This would involve, continuing with the consumption of natural gas, in order to dispose of the refuse-derived fuel. This is an approach that is likely to result in some operational issues over time and difficult decisions in the near term. Another approach that we have evaluated through the waste energy options study is the possibility of developing a dedicated waste energy facility in which there would be very little natural gas used to combust the RDF, but which would allow the greenhouse gases associated with combusting the RDF to be reduced greatly. But the trade-off is that kind of an option comes with a significant capital cost. The lowest cost alternative in the waste energy option study was $120 million of capital investment. We are in conversations with an engineering firm that works in this field that has approached us and indicated that they think that that kind of operation might be had for a smaller capital investment. But we don't want to continue to reevaluate the same alternative over and over and not get a significantly different answer. So we're going to continue the conversation with that consultant and see if there is a more cost-effective solution that they can easily identify. But if we're not able to find one, we're going to need to to either make a decision to pursue this alternative or to pursue a different alternative in terms of disposing of solid waste in the community. So that brings us to the third potential alternative that we might approach, which is to, like many communities in the country, invest in traditional recycling solutions to divert and reuse materials as much as possible, with the remainder being landfilled and disposed of. Now, how that occurs could come in a couple of different ways. It could come with haulers directly hauling their materials to a landfill. It could come in the form of a transfer station that could aggregate those products and reduce the amount of road miles that that the material has to be driven in order to consolidate it and make it more efficient. So these are things that we're continuing to explore and evaluate and understand what the costs are and who potential partners might be and how it might work in practice. Each of these different alternatives have different greenhouse gas impacts. So again, as Don mentioned, the RDF, disposal of the RDF itself in a waste to energy system has a lower greenhouse gas impact than if you were to bury it in a landfill where there was no methane capture. And additionally, hauling the material long distances adds greenhouse gas emissions. But the trade-off there is that we're increasing greenhouse gases in the energy, in the electricity sector of our overall greenhouse gas inventory by combusting all the natural gas that's necessary to dispose of the refuse-derived fuel. So there are some trade-offs there. Regardless of the alternative that we pursue into the future, we've recognized that increased recycling and diversion options in the community seem to have little downside. So we have continued to roll out different opportunities for people in the community to recycle and to dispose of materials like cardboard, like organics. We have options to dispose of plastic bottles with twist-off lids, mixed paper, scrap metal, food waste, glass, and a variety of other materials through bins that are in the community, but then also we have a one-stop shop type solution at the resource recovery facility. And we're looking to continue to expand those options into the future. All of those potential paths that we might take benefit from having material go into those options rather than going into the municipal solid waste stream and either being landfilled or converted into RDF. And that's particularly true at the moment where we have a curtailment in the amount of natural gas that we can procure for the power plant, which means that more material needs to be diverted from the resource recovery facility. We have some information in the report regarding the resident satisfaction survey from last year, and that sends a signal to us that there continues to be some appetite in the community for increased recycling options. I think there are different types of materials that people may be more or less willing to handle and recycle or participate in a program in order to dispose of in a different way than simply throwing it in the garbage. But it certainly seems to us like there is some potential there. So our next steps are to continue investing in the recycling and diversion initiatives that we've already begun ramping up, to educate the public about the alternatives that exist and ways in which they might dispose of their waste in a manner that benefits not only the environment but our operations, and then develop a long-term strategy for how we are going to dispose of waste in the community into the future. And it's also incumbent on us to be thinking about the reliance of the rest of the county on us, as we have partnership agreements with nearly all of the communities in Story County and with the county itself. So we have a little bit larger area of responsibility at the moment than just the Ames community. So we need to continue to work with our county partners, the other communities in the resource recovery system, as well as some of the potential partners like Metro Waste Authority, which we've had a number of really constructive conversations with about alternatives and ways that we might work together to dispose of waste into the future. And taking that information, come up with some sort of a long-term plan for how we're going to handle waste. That's all separate from the other layer to this, which is how the waste is collected through what is currently an open collection system with a variety of haulers in the community. The council has had a number of discussions about the prospect of an organized collection system, which would potentially economize how the waste is collected and getting it into the disposal facility in a more in a less greenhouse gas intensive manner.
Brian, can you explain how they're tied together now, collection and disposal? Because the council, I think, wants us to move ahead with the collection decision, but we've learned maybe that they need to be considered at the same time.
Yeah, so I think as we've looked at the impact of the natural gas reduction in the power plant over the summer and the impacts that then has on the ability to dispose of the waste, it appears that there's more urgency for us to figure out how are we going to dispose of it rather than how do we get it to the place it needs to be disposed of at. Both are important, but we do think that we've got to make a decision about where it's going to go and how it's going to be handled on a much more near-term timeline. Now, they are tied together in that depending on decisions like, are we going to do curbside collection of recyclables? Are we going to do organics collection? How are we going to handle these materials? That might impact whether or how the city wants to arrange for that collection to occur through contracts or through the open market. So there's a lot of pieces here.
Could you also explain why the status quo, especially as it relates to the Boone landfill, is probably not going to be a possibility in the future?
Sure. So we are in a comprehensive solid waste planning area that includes Boone County, and the Boone County landfill is the final disposition of municipal solid waste in that planning area. The comprehensive plan expires at the end of June 2025. And one of the things that's been a real struggle for Boone County over the past number of years is that historically from 2001 through about 2017, the amount of material coming from Story County to be deposited in the Boone County landfill was very small. It consisted of reject materials from the resource recovery facility and then a couple thousand tons per year of municipal solid waste that was directly hauled to Boone County landfill, either because it was there were planned or unplanned outages at either resource recovery or the electric plant, or because it was material that wasn't suitable to be processed through the resource recovery plant, or it was construction and demolition material, which has to go there directly. As we experience more operational issues in the electric utility in the last couple of years, there was a significant increase in the amount of material that had to be directly hauled to the Boone County landfill. And that exposed that's a real significant pressure point for them. That landfill has a finite amount of airspace, right? That's what landfills are in the business of selling. They're selling airspace, right? And limited prospects to be able to expand that. So I think the concern is that we would simply overwhelm them if the material that we would send to the landfill was to continue to increase. because we're not doing a waste to energy system any longer, or because we have reliability issues, or you name it. That's a real concern for them. There are also some concerns, I suppose, from our end, perhaps, that that their landfill facilities don't have the capability of doing methane capture. There are other landfills in the state, a handful that do provide that option, and so as we look to figure out what happens at the conclusion of this existing comprehensive solid waste plan, we have to figure out whether we remain with Boone County, whether we become sort of an independent broker of where our solid waste goes, or if we join in with another solid waste planning area. It's really going to be incumbent on us to drive that discussion and identify the partners that we want to work with and figure out where we go. But that's something that we're going to need to arrange here in the next 18 months.
So the time frame is really concerning to me. From a planning perspective, June of 2025 is tomorrow.
Mhm.
So have we explored options as we look at these alternatives of working with Boone to develop an alternative site? Is that I feel like we need to have a fallback position. If we can't get something else worked out, we need to simultaneously have something else in hand, because we can't get close to that time frame, because we can't get boxed in as a community, and people are expecting us to make sure that we've got a solution in hand. It may not be the best solution, but we've got to have something in hand. We cannot run out of time. And because then it forces us to do very unpleasant and typically very expensive alternatives. So are we having any kind of negotiations with Boone, either to extend that contract to give us more time for consideration, or looking at an alternative site in Boone that we would contribute to the developmental costs of that site?
Yeah, I don't sense that there is a prospect for an alternative site in Boone, but there are other solid waste planning areas, Marshall County, Metro Waste, the metro areas that have plenty of capacity for solid waste. It's just a matter of working out the details of how we get out of the Boone the central Iowa solid waste planning area and into a different one. And John might be able to describe that a little bit more in detail about how that process works, but we have alternatives. We just need to sort out those details.
Okay, well, I just want to make sure that we're responsible for making sure that we land this, and the prospects of hauling our garbage all the way to Marshall County is even a greater expense and distance, and the carbon cost of that hauling.
Yep.
That would be a challenge. So I just want to make sure that as a council, we're staying eyes focused on this time horizon. Thanks.
Your questions?
At what point, or is it important to involve the other Story County entities that are part of that partnership? Are you already having those discussions, or is that something that you'll do once you know what the preferred method is going to be? Then you will have that conversation.
I think we need to really understand what are the viable alternatives first. We have been, so all of the partnering or communities in the resource recovery system receive our annual report about the resource recovery system, and we've been talking in that annual report in the cover letter on paragraph 1, sentence 1 about some of the challenges we've had over the past several years. So we need to figure out what are the viable alternatives for us as a community before we go and meet with them, I think.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
I was curious about food waste. Is it a big part of what our solid waste is? And do we have, I mean, are we just going to hold steady on what we're currently doing with food waste, or has there been any progress in expanding that system?
So we continue to evaluate the potential for anaerobic digestion with our own wastewater treatment plant. But also, as Brian mentioned, we've been having conversations with other planning areas, and some of those conversations included the possibility of constructing new anaerobic digestion for the different comp area that we may be involved with. So that's still at the forefront of what we're looking at.
Cool. Thank you.
You'll see in the CIP a project that expands the current wastewater water push control plant, increase the capabilities of accepting the food waste into it for
Oh, good.
anaerobic digesting in that plant, right, as an alternate fuel source.
How much do we have anybody got an idea how much of the solid waste we see is food?
Percentage wise?
Yeah, I think it's
Organic
maybe
matter.
25 to 30%.
All right. Thank you.
Any other concluding questions? All right, move on. Step 3, net zero and net zero ready new construction.
Step 3 is possibly kind of addressing a different part of the equation here. So our growth, we have about 23% of our current population is projected to, we're projected to increase by about 23% according to the projections of Ames Plan 2040 during the next 20 some years. That's all baked into the business as usual model that was part of the greenhouse gas inventory and part of the climate action plan. So the growth is in the plan. Nothing in the plan restricted growth directly. So how do you mitigate growth related to new construction? So these strategies in step 3 are trying to reduce the carbon footprint of new construction, not just of residential, but also non-residential. As we look at this, I believe in the climate action plan, it's really targeted to start to see implementation by 2025 and then scale that up to 2030 to see new construction really looked at as a net zero, meaning that the amount of energy that is consumed on site by a building or the occupants of a building, not the building, is equal to what is generated on the site. And we describe in the report a net zero ready as an interim step where you design a facility that if renewable energy was installed, you would meet that net zero standard. Net zero would actually be once you've installed the green energy source, you're no longer emitting carbon as an outcome of your use of the home. One of the key components of that is that you have to size a building to the energy generation potential. And another component is you can't have a carbon fuel source as part of the building. So that would mean natural gas is not considered an element that can be utilized in a net zero home. We talk about this a lot in this report. We talked mostly about it from a residential standpoint. That seems to be what we're all focused on is home construction. And we talk about what that means for a single family home. And then there's another strategy that's a version of net zero called a passive home, which is really not even necessarily using renewable energy, but it's an ultra tight envelope using energy created by cooking processes and other things, solar heat gain to really maintain the temperature of the home and provide for that comfort. You still have a plug load for your oven and everything else that you use in that. What we're saying is that under Iowa law, we can't directly through the building code require these types of things to be done. We have an energy code that's adopted at the state level that we have to administer, and we are not allowed to create a higher performance requirement through the building code. So what are there other options to do this? We can use our other powers that we have through the zoning ordinance and also through our ability to negotiate development agreements to try to push these concepts forward. So in the zoning ordinance, it's unclear that we could really truly get to a net zero expectation. We can incorporate certain design elements that are supportive of it, solar orientation of a home, how you do the fenestration of a facade in terms of how does that work with heat gain from the solar orientation, and some other things can be done to promote better efficiency and better development standards for different types of buildings. So that's one option we could go for. The other option is the development agreement version. And this only works with people that are trying to annex to the city or asking for a zone change. So under Iowa law, we can negotiate any kind of pre-annexation agreement we want with someone that wants to enter into the city and ultimately they want to pursue development. We can enter into an agreement about what they would agree to do as they develop property. They could agree to build net zero, even though the state code doesn't require that. They could do that, and we could enforce it through our agreement rather than through the building codes. And the same concept applies to a zone change. Now, I think the issues that we think it's a little bit easier probably to address it as a housing construction issue because you're talking about smaller buildings. It's something that is it's been modeled in other places and been done. I think the harder part is when you look at commercial buildings, especially industrial buildings. They're unique. How does that work in a city? And I don't think there's a one formula for assuring how an industrial building or a commercial building necessarily meets these standards. So it can be done. Again, other places have required it or at least incent it to be done, but it's something that is unknown to us exactly what the outcome would be. It's something that if we move forward on this, we're going to have to work through it in a learning mode, not just for ourselves, but also with the building industry in Ames. And I think we highlighted in the report, one of the issues is, would we be viewed as being overly restrictive if the other markets adjacent to us are not doing that? Is that going to hamper our ability to meet our other goals for housing production, housing density, and economic growth in the city while also being sustainable? So I think there's some friction there. A lot of it probably has to do with potential for increased costs, but for the most part, I think it's unfamiliarity with what is expected. A lot of times builders or developers, they fear the unknown, which is very scary when you don't know what the final outcome of a process is. Why would you choose to start that process if you can go to another market and maybe avoid that process? Now, if we can make that understandable and we can educate people and we can all agree it's going to work and help that, then maybe we can remove that barrier and get this going quicker than it may seem we can do now. One other thing we wanted to highlight is within the growth, we talk a lot about my buddy Don here in Ames Electric and how great they're going to be in providing green resources to the community. A lot of our growth, almost all of our growth, won't be in the Ames Electric service territory, especially our residential housing Midland co-op will probably be the territory that has the most residential growth in it. It's the most territory to the west and to the north where single family homes are going to be built and some multifamily. A lot of the Ames Electric housing growth will be infill, so it'll be probably replacement of or intensification of existing sites. So we aren't necessarily going to be directly able to incent some of these through Ames Electric. We're going to have other energy providers that we need to understand how they're looking at this from an renewable energy portfolio, just like Don is talking about. When we did the greenhouse gas inventory in 2020, you can see the information there. We broke out the kind of the profile of each energy provider, so you could kind of understand what the green energy mix was at that point in time by each of them. I don't think any of them were a whole lot. None of them were less green than us. Some of them were more green than us. I just don't know where they've gone since then. For example, if you're looking at Des Moines relying a lot on Mid-America's commitment to 100% renewable energy. Mid-America is not our energy provider at any part of the city. So the discussions in Des Moines aren't exactly pertinent to what we're talking about because their energy provider is a big partner in what they're doing, and they can meet a lot, and not all of their energy requirements from that one company. So for tonight, what we have outlined here are two strategies, again, for agreements or pursuing zoning amendments. The way we have this structured right now is you have it in the batch of issues to be prioritized as part of the planning division work plan. You'll be seeing that again. You looked at that as a preliminary review in October. We're going to come back at either the end of January or in February after a couple other things are resolved here. And then you're going to decide if these measures should be put into the priority for 2024 against other issues that are floating out there. Is there any questions about the terminology, the strategies, any of the growth assumptions that go into this?
So, Kelly, couple. So, if the legislature gets wind of the fact that we are doing an end around the building codes by, in essence, using zoning or development agreements to achieve things that we couldn't achieve through the building code process, how long do you think it's realistically possible that they're not going to put the hammer on this and legislatively pull that chain.
But he's not, he couldn't answer that.
Yeah.
Well,
I
the
wouldn't
question-
know that. I think that a bill that was introduced last year that wasn't adopted would limit the ability of a city to regulate any elements of a residential building that's not an apartment building, which would include some of the things I'm talking about, orientation. But in terms of development agreements, I'd be really shocked if they undid that ability, because that's used all over the state for many, many purposes. I think it's the zoning elements that would be at risk more than the development agreement options.
And so this legislature has signaled very clearly that they want to limit the ability of municipal governments to make changes to this building code. And I want to proceed with great caution if we think that this is going to be possible. I've been through the movie of some of these things that we've done in a very forward-thinking manner. I was supportive of them, and then the legislature pulled the rug out from under us.
Let me just emphasize when we've come forward, remember the 6 moves were recommended by the consultants, and we're showing you options to help implement them. You have to make the policy decision which, if any of these 7 initial steps you want to make.
So
we're bringing this forward because we're responding to the consultant's recommendation.
Right.
And now we're going to implement. Now you decide, city council, which ones you want us to take a step forward. Your other question could be, how many other cities in the country or in the state of Iowa uses these kind of development, or these type of annexation agreements, or rezoning agreements to accomplish, carbon reductions? I don't know if we found any that you do that. So will that put us at a maybe at a negative position compared, if we're in competition with other cities, we're trying to attract people? I don't know. You have to ask that question.
So as we evaluate these different moves, there's a cost benefit analysis that we have to do. And there's, as you point out, there's a policy aspect. And my observation is that if the legislature sees this as an end around, this will be a very short exercise. When we were discussing this before, I thought we were looking at trying to find ways to incentivize. I would be very supportive of looking at ways to use tax abatement and other sort of carrots as a way of achieving these goals. So if someone wanted to build a house that was net zero or net zero ready, we could monetize the value of that and provide some form of tax abatement to get to that incentive.
I was going to touch on that for a second. So that is at the end of the section under here, and I think it was actually a little bit confusing where it ended up, because it started to talk about the relationship of tax abatement and retrofits, and the math is not the same for a retrofit as it is new construction. So if you improve your home's energy efficiency that already exists, your property value is not going to go up. So we can't give you an abatement for investing in your home for energy efficiency if you already have the home. New construction is different, right? It's a wholly new improvement. We can give tax abatement for new construction, which is different than retrofits. But as we had the conversation with the short-term housing task force recommendations, if we're just giving abatement to try to produce more housing, will there be any criteria that go with those abatement? That's a question that didn't get answered or has not yet been answered with the short-term housing task force recommendations, if any expectations or criteria might come along with that.
Because we can't offer a sliding scale of abatement, right? We can't offer a certain amount of abatement if you build a new home, and then an additional abatement if it's energy.
I think if we understand what council wants to accomplish, then staff can try to figure out exactly what structure reaches as many of these goals as possible. It was a little tricky to what you said, Bronwyn, is true in the sense that we said it's difficult to have like conditional levels of abatement. But that doesn't mean you can't have different programs.
Right.
Sure.
So you might get a smaller abatement if you do nothing, and you might get a higher abatement if you include other features, but they're different programs instead of one program with different levels in it. So
Thank you.
As we learn more about what our goals are, I think staff can create a structure that might be able to help with the incentive side.
And I haven't had a chance we haven't done any kind of workshop on housing where we could explore some of the merits of these with local developers and builders to see what their response would be. but I like the idea where possible of using carrots instead of sticks, making things voluntary instead of mandatory. We don't yet know what the price tag of these design elements will be. SSG created a very rosy scenario that if developers only knew the benefits of this, then everybody would want to do this. I think that's nonsense, because if that was the case, we'd build net zero ready houses already, because that would be the wisest, prudent thing to do. So that, I think that's nonsense. But before we would ever impose this kind of heavy-handed approach with respect to development, we have to understand the price tag to our consumers. From my vantage point, the number one issue our city is facing right now is a lack of housing. And we need to weigh that. All of us need to recognize the challenges our community is facing. So if we're going to do something that layers on top of the challenges we already have, additional cost to development, that is counterintuitive to our goal of building affordable housing in the community.
Do you have any other questions?
I think I said enough. Yeah.
Great. Anybody else?
I just wanted to make a comment that I like how you're thinking creatively about opportunities with MICA, and that being a way to serve low-income folks in the community, which I think also has the benefit of ensuring that that level of housing is still going to be able to be reintroduced into our housing stock. So thank you for that exploration as well.
All right. Thanks, Kelly. Who's going to handle step 4, retrofitting existing
So I'll
buildings?
handle step 4, retrofitting of existing buildings, and that's where we talk about the MICA partnership. So thank you for that.
Sorry.
And retrofitting existing buildings has the ability potentially to move the needle on our carbon reduction up to 15%. And thanks to my buddy Don, a lot of the retrofitting, most of the retrofitting would be in the Ames municipal electric system. So we could look at our smart energy rebates and incentivize. Some of the things that we've looked at as ways to move the needle on retrofitting, and again, we're looking at residential, commercial, and industrial properties, were things like air handlers and water heater permits. That is a pretty small reduction in the overall cost, and we don't really feel that that has a lot of potential. But the smart energy incentives does. And also one of the things we had talked about before with you was implementing a small scale pilot project, looking at income restrictions, low, smaller homes, and trying to do a retrofit on 10 to 15 of those homes. In studying that process a little bit more, it became increasingly difficult to determine how those pilot homes would be selected. We're looking at investments of $30,000 to $50,000 in each one, and the bang for the buck is perhaps not as big as we had hoped. So we looked at other ways to diversify who benefits from a retrofit, and that's when we looked at what are some existing programs that we could tap into. One of them is the weatherization program that's administered through MICA. And it was identified a couple of different ways to help support that organization as a possibility. Another idea, looking at the entire community as a way to benefit all homeowners, would be Ames Electric Services would offer comprehensive energy audits, including a carbon reduction roadmap for customers. The city would borrow funds from a green bank at a very, very low or no cost interest, and that Ames Electric Services customers would be offered no or low interest loans that would be financed through their utility bill. So it would just simply be a financing system where as part of your monthly utility bill, it's based on a concept known as pay as you save. So we would connect the financing with the address. So even if the homeowner moved on, that financing would stay with that address. And the payback would be based on the savings through these energy improvements in a home. Those were some of the ones we looked at.
Susan, you said Green Bank. What is that? What are you referring to?
Yeah,
You borrowed from a Green Bank.
a green bank. There's
There's a red bank.
several programs that we're researching that provide loans to municipalities, not to individuals. And then municipality does the financing to its customers, to its residents, based on energy saving improvements that they make in their own homes.
So example would be, where would we borrow from?
RESP, or the Rural Electric
Rural Energy Savings
Program, yeah, would be one example of a green bank that has money set aside for municipalities to draw down on and then finance customer improvements.
Is it here in Iowa?
It's national, but you can use it here also.
Questions for Susan? All right, Corey, we'll look to you to talk about step 5 and 6, I believe. Is that correct?
That is correct. So step 5 is retrofitting municipal buildings. As you can see in the report, we just started a Department of Energy program. It's a cohort with other cities to look at exactly that. We'll be meeting with them once a month for the next 6 months. And part of that process is to be able to develop an RFP to go out and hire a consultant to then come look at all the municipal buildings. So we would hope that RFP, we would do that. Obviously, they're going to look at our energy use, age of buildings, all that things, kind of bigger scale. Obviously, we have some larger HVAC systems in some of our buildings, but we also have smaller buildings. But then kind of a cost benefit. What is the most bang for our buck? Are they going to recommend maybe an end of life replacement like we've talked about with the auditorium HVAC? That it's end of life, you're doing it, now would be the time to make that improvement. So that would be what we were thinking on that. Obviously, solar might come into that equation for some buildings. As Steve kind of explained, there's some differences with some of the buildings. The 3 buildings with the large flat space, we might allow electric to use that and benefit the community. Other buildings, it might make more sense for them to put solar on and reduce operational costs. So those are things we'll keep discussing as they come up. Another thing we'll look at as part of that retrofit, though, also is what do we need to do to increase vehicle charging infrastructure at these buildings? Obviously, some buildings could be quite a bit. You think about the Public Works and Fleet facility to get the available charging to that could be quite the expense. City Hall, what do we need for infrastructure, things like that as well for that piece of it. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have, but we're kind of just getting this process off the ground, and we'll definitely have more conversations as we go along.
I have a question, but it may be for Don. And I feel like I should know the answer to this, but are all Ames municipal buildings within Ames Electric Services territory?
Wastewater treatment is not.
It
Is
isn't.
the first one that comes to mind.
So we may even have some municipal buildings that we can't work our electric services programs to benefit.
We call it magic.
I like it.
Other questions?
What
Could
did
you
you say the
clarify-
timeline?
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. What
ahead,
did you
yeah.
say the timeline was for that, having the audit RFP and everything?
So our cohort's going to last 6 months. After that, then, so this summer, we would start developing that RFP.
Cool.
Corey, could you clarify, would the funds for the retrofit, would they also come from a green bank or utility ratepayers, or how would we do that?
A lot of different scenarios on that because it might depend on the building, what they use to pay for the building, what funds they're using to pay for it is going to be part of their CIP. Are there grants? Are there, offsets with electric services? So I think it's going to be every kind of building might be slightly different on how we answer that question.
It's mostly going to be local funding.
But if what pot of money?
Depends what building it is. If it's a water building and a sewer building, it's paid for those utilities, those user fees. Electric, it's paid for electric. Parks and Rec is usually general obligation bonds, it's property taxes. Depends what building they're, right? City Hall is kind of a portion. We share, a lot of the funds contribute to the operation of the City Hall improvements.
Yeah, I'm trying to think through the impact for taxpayers and utility ratepayers. And
we'll have to show you that as soon as we get the list of projects. Then we'll have to cost them out. We're going to tell you what it costs, and then we're going to have to see how it affects the utility rates or the property tax rates, and you'll have to make those decisions and insert them into a capital improvements plan. There will be costs.
So it's just going to be helpful that we think comprehensively about both property taxes and utility ratepayers. We have a lot of people on fixed incomes in the community, and so I worry a little bit that these initiatives will significantly make the cost of living here go up. So I just want to.
Good point.
Keep
Our
an eye
job
on
is to
this.
get you the information, and you have to decide which ones you want to move ahead with.
Right.
And is it presumed that not only the cost benefit, but also what the yield is in terms of reduction of?
You should know what your dollar reduction is.
Right.
You know,
But no, I mean, but in terms of
Of
carbon
emissions,
reduction,
yes,
yeah.
carbon reduction.
Because the point is maybe you spend X number of dollars, it's cost effective, but
well, yeah.
you
Hopefully,
don't-
that's
you
what
don't
our
really move the
report will
needle.
show. Hopefully, our report will.
Yeah, we'd like to
Just-
get it into a cost benefit. I think, 15 years ago when we started the Cool Cities initiative, we did a lot of what we would probably call the low-hanging fruit, LED lights, small HVAC projects. So some of these projects might be quite large for some buildings. So we'll definitely have to have that cost benefit. How much dollars are you going to have to spend to reduce? And then, again, give that to council and let them decide which way they want to go.
So cost benefit is a little bit different here. We'll be thinking both in terms of we spend these dollars and, for example, LED lights might have a 5 or 6 year payback before that investment is realized. But here we also have a climate benefit to consider as well. And so it's cost versus the benefit financially and the benefit for our climate action plan. So it's a little bit more of a sophisticated, I think, analysis to do.
Yeah.
All right. Step
We're up,
6,
we're up for that.
I like it.
electrify municipal fleet.
So yeah, electrifying the municipal fleet. We talk about this in the report. We're starting to see more electric options. Hopefully we'll have 2 new trucks this spring in service that will be all electric. To help this, we have identified funding from kind of fleet revenue to help departments get into either hybrids or all electric. And there might be a question, why hybrids? Right now, there's probably not enough electric vehicles to meet all the needs of the city. You think about things like police, some of our trucks that might be larger, hybrid might make more sense. So that's where we're at. As more electric comes available, I think you'll start seeing, more SUVs, things like that might meet the needs better. We'll continue to do that. I think you could look at our history at fleet. We've kind of always been pushing on the environmental impacts of our fleet, kind of being leaders, E85, or B100 with our large trucks, which is a really great option right now for where we are with that. But there is an impact to it in charging. That's a cost that we'll have to consider as we move to electric. The more electric we get, the more chargers we have to have. How's that impact the buildings and the departments? So I think you'll continue to see us try to push and get more electric into the fleet as we can. As you see vehicles come through, we'll kind of explain maybe why we couldn't or what the options are. But hopefully we'll see kind of a shift with the big 3 automakers. That's usually who we're dealing with. As they get more away from what I'd call premium electric vehicles to everyday electric vehicles, that will help us out.
Questions?
Corey, have we got a good sense at this point of the lifespan of our hybrids versus the combustion engine vehicles and whether they're lasting as long, longer, not as long?
I would say they last longer. We've had some issues maybe with the first generation hybrids of certain vehicles that didn't perform as well as we thought. A lot of that's warranty. But we're seeing longer because of the regenerative braking and the idling, especially if you think about police not having the engine on when they idle every time. That's a huge help to extending the life of vehicles. So I think we'll see a longer life out of these. We're seeing quite a bit of parts reduction. In police, we're seeing a 50% reduction in costs when you factor in fuel and maintenance. Electric could be higher than that for some departments, hopefully. Kind of same thing. You're not going to replace brakes. And that's even less because there's no oil changes, things like that, but you still have tires. So I think we expect them to last a little bit longer, but we still need to look at, maximizing the value of the vehicles too, and when we sell them.
Corey, just a quick question. This may not be in your wheelhouse. Is Saturide considering using biodiesel? I mean, this Optimus system has really been a home run thanks to REG and the fleet department, working together to kind of do this, this pilot program. Is that something that transit? Brian, can you comment on that? Maybe?
Yeah, we're going to enter into a pilot for the buses too now.
Using the Optimus system.
Yes,
yeah, and we've had discussions with them with our experience and how it's worked.
Yeah,
because we just you approved a 3 engines, motors being replaced, and I was amazed to see that there was 350,000 miles on each motor. I mean, there's a lot of miles that are being driven by the buses, and thinking that'd be a great way to leverage that. I assume that was the case, but that's great to hear.
Yeah, yep, just this year.
Okay, any other questions on the fleet? You going to take us home, Susan, on the step 7?
Yep. So I'll wrap up with step 7, which was to create a mayor's climate action plan leadership task force. We did look around at other communities and try to find something to replicate, but this is very unique. And so there are lots of different ways you can move forward with something like this. The idea would be gather community leaders to share greenhouse gas reduction strategies, to look at best practices, and then look at general energy policy and conservation efforts. You could look to the Smart Business Challenge membership, or perhaps we know our large energy users that Don keeps a list of, or a mix of representation. But it will help us understand what the steps that are currently being taken, how they might impact what our carbon reduction looks like in the future. So it's an exciting group, and I'm sure people would be very impressed to be tapped to serve on it by the mayor.
Questions on that one?
You seem to offer 2 models for this. Isn't there a third model which combines those 2?
I think we could pursue whatever model you.
I would hate to see those willing and enthusiastic community members who are not already part of the Small Business Challenge left out of the opportunity to participate. So I think a balance between the 2 would be really a good idea, since there's different expertise out in the community.
Sure. I know that Don had a statistic that was pretty impressive. The largest 10 customers use how much energy?
Oh, about
25%.
at least 25%. Yes.
So you have people that are, the actions that they take will make a significant impact on our carbon reduction. And so we want to make sure that we get people on this task force that can and are making a difference. But I see the value of adding in and bringing a diversity of opinions to the group.
I guess I would just interpret leadership as not only the leaders who can make those changes in their own facilities, but also the leaders in community education, so that others are brought in to help with the achieving of our aspirational goals.
So Gloria brings up a good point. And this is I just make a plug for those who are watching. That Smart Business Challenge is a fantastic program. Mary has put together a team of interns, and we've done this in our small building, and they do an evaluation of our practices, ways in which we can make measurable differences in the carbon impact of our building. And they're fantastic to work with. There's no cost to this. It's a really great program for people who are interested in that.
Thank you.
All right, open up public comment. Is anyone that wants to address council on this topic tonight? Justin?
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Appreciate the opportunity to come up and speak in front of you. As I read through the staff report, I actually had some different thoughts. And I felt like I had a unique perspective. I spent 6 years on URAB. I'm coming up on my 4th year on Building Board of Appeals, and hard to believe I've been with Hunsker Companies now 9 years. But it wasn't until, and even served on the subcommittee for the Climate Action Plan. But it wasn't until just in the last day or two in reading the staff report that some different ideas came to mind. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the retrofits. First, I think that's a brilliant idea. That was one of the things that we struggled with on the Climate Action Plan subcommittee of, how do we incent, but then that person doesn't turn around and sell that property and then capture all the community investment. So I think the staff did a great job of thinking through that and finding a solution of tying that back with the address and the pay as you save. The one that I spend the majority of my time thinking about and going around is the new construction. And so that's what, obviously with work, that was a lot of my focus. And so I think I had mentioned it in my letter. In 2023, Don and Joel were presenting to the Home Builders Association about some of the rebates. And I was on URAB when we basically saw that a lot of those rebates weren't necessary. And so we reduced a lot of those incentives. And it was at that meeting that they said, okay, you know what, we're going to incent a lot more electric, and we're actually going to put on a bonus if buyers choose to go all electric. And here are the criteria. And so we had 2 projects at that point in time, 2 different investor groups. And as soon as we looked at what it would take to achieve those electric criteria, as well as the rebates, with that bonus rebate that Joel and Don had talked about, I took that to those different property owners and said, this makes financial sense. This is something you need to do. And both groups went ahead and did it. And so as I was writing my letter to you guys, I thought about the all electric piece. Okay. Well, maybe we don't need to think in terms of the net zero or the net zero ready, because if we're going all electric on a home, which or a unit, which what we found is cost effective with some rebates. But then as I was reading the staff report, and they were talking in Don's portion about the utility scale of a solar array or a wind farm, then all of a sudden, it doesn't matter if we're producing it on the side of the building, because we've got that economy of scale from the solar array or the wind farm. And so it's much more cost effective. And all of a sudden, we're looking at through these incentives, right now it's through electric services. And when Kelly was talking about Midland Power and Alliance territory, I wasn't thinking in those terms. But I have to imagine that if we went to those utilities and said, hey, this is working for us, will you mirror some of our rebates in our territory? And you're going to get additional load as a result, that they would see that light and say, hey, this makes sense for us too. So like I said, just totally different train of thought than what I was thinking, even last week in thinking about the staff report and some of the things. Let's see, what else did I have here? Yeah, and so in closing, like I said, in my letter, I always prefer choice. And I think as long as we have the incentives that make sense for whoever the buyer is or whoever the end user is, the logical person would say, this makes sense. I'm going to do this. So anyway, I said I would leave that in closing, but one other thing that I wanted to bring up from electric services, and I know I talked about this probably a lot during the subcommittee meetings, but Midland Power has a reduced rate if you've got, whether it's geothermal or a heat pump for a furnace, if you're using electric as your heating source, your electric rate is 50% of what the normal rate is. Okay. The disadvantage in Midland's program is they want that on a separate meter. So then all of a sudden you have to pay the electrician to bring in a separate meter, and then you've got all this additional expense, and that's a harder sell. I think if we as a utility said, hey, you know what, as one of the benefits, if you go all electric, and maybe this is, in lieu of a rebate or some other combination, we could say, if you go all electric and you have this commitment, similar to what our air conditioning credits are, the $5 a month for the summer, that electric utilities can turn off your air conditioner for a few minutes every hour. But if you do that, then we as a utility would offer you a discounted rate for all of your electric. So just different ideas, but anyway, those are the most recent thoughts. Happy to answer any questions anybody might have.
Thank you, Justin.
Very good.
Yes,
Thank you.
As you know, we're just in the beginning stages here, so appreciate your feedback. All right, we'll close public comment. Is there any closing questions? And
Yeah, I just
what was
wanted
the
to,
next step?
I think it was important for us to report back to you what actually we said when the consultant's report came out a long time ago. These initial steps were to respond to their 6 big moves. And we don't expect any direction tonight. We wanted you to know what we're working on. Sometimes we go away and you don't think this is a top priority for us. We're not moving ahead, but we are. I guess the only direction, if we were taking a step that you didn't want us to spend any more time on, now would be a good time to tell us no. But otherwise, we'll have to come back with each one of those as we develop agreements or whatever. In terms of Kelly's section, that has to be prioritized. If you want to move ahead with that, even with that concept, you have to prioritize it with this other program of work. If you don't, it won't be a high priority and it will drop there. But we'll come back. If you think we're on the right track on these 7 steps, we'll keep working on them.
I had one follow-up question on this is the first time I've heard tonight that we might, in essence, preclude someone for using natural gas in their home, whether it's cooking or for heating.
We heard that.
Well, pardon me?
Did you say we said that? We were going to do that?
We can't do that.
We can't do that.
Well,
No,
I
state
apologize.
state legislature eliminated that.
We could
do it in
incentivize it
development
being all electric and through in a development agreement.
The code can't restrict it. The development agreement, because it's voluntarily agreed to, the developer could choose not to put it into their homes.
Yeah.
Right. We can't restrict it, but a developer can agree not to do it.
Yeah. So, and could you clarify, the legislature precludes cities from doing that?
From
Code.
they passed a law that said that you could not ban the use of natural gas.
City cannot.
The city
regulate
cannot
in
do
any
that.
way the use or distribution of natural gas.
So assuming if you enter an agreement that you've agreed to do it on your own volition, you're doing that.
Correct.
So, I remain concerned tonight that the idea of pursuing annexation agreements or using zoning or development agreements is a path that will put us sideways with the legislature. John, no one's been working with the legislature more than you Would there be merit in having a conversation to see, is that something that they would have concerns, or would we have some freedom to pursue this, this line of inquiry?
Well, I think that if the council wants to pursue it further, I think we need more information, but I think it always is good to engage in conversation with them and explain what we're trying to accomplish and test the water, so to speak.
But so before we send the staff to pursue developing this idea, would it make sense to have an initial conversation with legislative leadership?
Sure can, and in fact, going to have some conversations Thursday regarding implications of our taxes with some legislators. We're going down to talk to them, so I could certainly float that and just say, hey.
That certainly be a helpful data point for us to know.
And they may just say, we don't know. But the point is, it's worth, I can sure ask him.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. All right. So is anyone, so unless we hear otherwise, let's council moves otherwise, they're gonna proceed on all these items with understanding we're not approving anything tonight, but just going ahead and just saying continue as proposed.
Well, and thanks for everyone's hard work on this. You know, it is apparent that, you know, we're taking things seriously and moving ahead with the climate action plan. And I'm glad to see some of the progress we've already made and what's on the table. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. John, don't go too far.
I know, yes, sir. Going right here.
All right, we will move on to item number 13, resolution approving auditorium alcohol concession policy.
So moved. Oh, wait.
Do you have any questions?
And appreciate Keith and Courtney coming. Is there any questions? I think that or Keith, you want to just give us a 1 or 2 minute quick point highlight, and then we can see if any questions.
I'll let Courtney give a quick little overview.
Yeah.
So back in May of 23, staff presented the concepts for alcohol at the city auditorium. Council did direct staff to continue with the concept to pursue with a contracted vendor. And so what Parks and Recreation staff has done is developed a policy for concessions with risk management, legal, and also the police department to really just provide some sort of a guide for when those services are implemented and making sure that we maintain a welcoming environment, protect city assets, and so forth. So some of the main highlights that you see in the staff report are regarded to what can be sold and when, vendor responsibilities, and the city's responsibilities as well. And so just for example, a couple quick highlights for the vendor responsibilities. They're going to be required to secure all the permits for the beer and wine service. There will be no hard liquor allowed. And then they will be responsible for all liquor liability in the dram shop, insurance, and additionally any license or permits required for the non-alcoholic concession items. They will also be required to attend the Iowa program for alcohol compliance training, as they will be doing all the ID checks and the service component. The city will have the ability to terminate the contract at any time, and we will continue to work as we go through the competitive bidding process for this service to, with risk, legal, and the police department to develop that contract. So one important note that I would want to mention is that if there is an event or rental that is eligible for beer and wine service and the renting party does not want alcohol to be served, they will be able to go through a process for an exemption, and staff will administratively review that. So with that, it is the recommendation that City Council adopt Alternative 1 as presented, and be happy to answer any questions.
So one question I had is under the exemptions, the first bullet says alcohol service will not be provided for Iowa State University student-sponsored events. So that was kind of surprising to me, just because student-sponsored events could come in many forms, like the Fifth and Clark Fridays that we had this fall. It was co-sponsored by the City Auditorium and then KURE Radio, which is an ISU student-sponsored group. So since that's a concert that outside groups could also attend and not just students, would that type of event not be able to have alcohol service?
That event specifically, so the Fifth and Clark concert series would be an event that we would want to have alcohol service at. If there are sponsorships, obviously with ISU student representative, it would really be a case-by-case basis on what event it actually is. And in that case, it would be more of who is the target audience. So if that target audience are those of age under 21, that would be where that non-alcohol service would come into play.
Gotcha.
Do we anticipate having to hire additional staff to cover the crowd management, alcohol area, perimeter management, that kind of thing?
Potentially, yes. And so that would be part of the city's responsibility to do that. In addition to the alcohol and concession policy, staff has been working on staffing guidelines for events that have alcohol service for things like that, securing the perimeter and crowd monitoring, et cetera. We could use a variety of different staff for that as well. It could be paid staff, it could be volunteers, obviously depending on the level of the event, the anticipated, ticket sales and so forth. That'll be a case-by-case determination, but we anticipate that we would be able to manage those. And obviously with the goal for introducing these services would be to not only make the events more inviting or entertaining for folks to attend, but potentially at drawing new events. It is also something to reduce the tax subsidy, so we would be conscious of that to make sure that it was beneficial for us to do so.
Is the payment from the staff come out of the 10% or in addition to?
It would be in addition to.
Other questions? I just had one. When you were just reviewing the their ability to opt out, so is it implicit in that every event will have alcohol served, and that's part of the vendor's contract, and someone would actually have to opt out versus wanting to sell it? Is that what you're saying?
It would be the intent that the city would serve alcohol at all events outside of the ones that we have deemed would not have alcohol service. The target audience under 21, the family events, religious related activities. So those would have the exemption that we, through our policies, that we would not allow that service, and then all the other events we would intend to have alcohol service unless the renting party had that exemption.
So I think it also mentions concessions. So would that include sodas, bottled water, things to eat? Is that
Yep,
correct?
any prepackaged food items, correct.
So a vendor would basically estimate what they think they could make in a year based on number of events that might be coming up, knowing that the staff has the ability to say, no, we're not going to, you can't do it because those kids are going to be there for whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Or if someone specifically asked to not have it served. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. And we would also explore the option too. Obviously, this would go and play with the vendor, but if there was no alcohol service, would it still be beneficial to have the non-alcoholic concession sales without the alcohol at an event?
And then would Parks and Rec collect a portion of the proceeds even if alcohol is not sold?
So we would, yes, we would retain 10% of all total sales
Any
at
sales.
the event, and that would be a minimum as well. So a minimum of 10% through the contract. That could be a higher percentage.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Yeah, I didn't understand that. Thanks for that clarifying question.
Yeah, it wasn't, and I didn't realize it until you mentioned it, and all of a sudden just clicked, oh, this is completely different. Now, I thought you would ask for it to be sold, not always have it sold.
In the 10 years I've served, we've seen quite an evolution in how we approach this. I mean, now you can buy alcohol in a movie theater, right? And so if you go to a Des Moines Symphony concert, you can buy a glass of wine at intermission. I mean, so I just think things have sort of lightened up a bit. I'm supportive of this, but thanks for that clarifying question.
Okay, any other questions? Open up public comment. Does anyone want to address City Council on this particular item? Seeing none, we'll close public comment. Is there a motion? Staff recommends alternative number 1.
Move alternative 1.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call.
Aye.
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 Aye. Thanks for your efforts. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you. Have a great night.
All right. Oh, what's the timeline, out of curiosity?
So next steps is that we would work to put a scope of service together to go through that bidding process. And then our hopes would be late spring, early summer.
Very good.
Would we ever expand this to city council meetings?
No.
I'll leave that up.
We
to
might,
you.
we might get a little bit better attendance. I'm just throwing that out there.
All right, we're moving.
Start holding them in the auditorium.
All right.
I like it.
We're gonna move on. All right. I know.
Charges, don't do it.
And
Don't
thank
put that
you.
in the minutes. Don't put that in the minutes. Oh, man.
Item number 14. Any questions for Mr. Com? He's here. Report was well written.
Yes.
All right. No questions. Is there a motion to approve preliminary plan specifications for roof replacement at the power plant and set February 14th, 2024 as the due date for bids and set February 27th as a date of public hearing and award a contract? Anita?
Move approval.
All right.
Second.
All right. Moved and seconded. Roll call.
Aye.
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 All right, very good. Thank you. We will move on to item number 15. HVAC replacement at the power plant. Any questions for Mr. Com on this one? Seeing none, I declare the public hearing on the HVAC replacement project at the power plant to be open. Is there anyone who wants to address City Council on this project? Seeing none, declare public hearing to be closed. Entertain a motion on resolution awarding the contract to Mechanical Comfort, Ames, Iowa for HVAC replacement at the power plant in the amount of $269,740.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
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 Very good. Moving on to item number 16. Entertain motion on second reading on text amendment for public nuisance property maintenance related to changes to the Ames Municipal Code.
Move on second.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
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 Thank you. And item 17, entertain motion on second reading on zoning text amendment to paving standards for basic utility uses and other similar uses.
Move on second.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
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 Thank you. Council, I'll just draw your attention on item number 18. That we are working for an amended agenda, and the one minor change is that in this third reading and adoption of the ordinance, it's to allow accessory dwelling units in residential districts as amended. So I entertain a motion on third reading and adoption of ordinance number 4516 on text amendments to Ames Municipal Code, Chapter 13 Rental Housing Code, Chapter 29 Zoning Ordinance, and Chapter 31 Historic Preservation to allow accessory dwelling units, also known as ADUs, in residential districts as amended.
Move on third as amended.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
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 Thank you. And we will move on to disposition and communications to council. We have two items tonight. First is a communication from Historic Preservation Commission.
So remember, you requested an explanation of what they were requesting. And I think you have to put this in the mix of the program of work when you make your decision. I think it's the next, the end of January or beginning of February, Kelly will come back for direction. So this would be in there to prioritize with the rest of the projects.
So for information and take under advisement. Second one is from a letter from Chris Murray, President, CEO of Denny Elwell, regarding a 13th Street PRC and overlay district abandonment consideration.
Yeah, you want to refer this to Kelly, Planning Director, and he'll give you a report back on what needs to be changed if you want to.
Move for
You wanna just do
referral.
it?
Oh, no, you said if you want to. I just was,
Oh, you don't want to?
I don't know.
No, this is an information memo. We'll get back to you.
Okay.
I think it's warranted. We can justify why it's warranted to make a change.
Thank you.
You may not agree, but that's
Move for approval, move for a memo.
Second.
Okay. Those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? Motion carried. All right, move on to council comments. Brahman, we'll start with you tonight.
Yeah, nothing for me. Thanks.
All right, Anita?
Just continuing to think about what happened in Perry recently
Mhm.
and sending our condolences and support to that community.
Thank you.
Looked forward to or really enjoyed our goal setting session this past weekend and looking forward to having those for the next 2 years coming up.
Thank you.
Got a couple things tonight. First, we all got to go to work this morning on roads that were by and large clear because people spent their night while we were sleeping cleaning our streets. And so it's a hard job. So we appreciate, Steve, we want to pass on behalf of council, just appreciation. It was a very challenging event. They did a great job. We've got a couple events coming up. One this weekend. Speaking of snow, for those who are interested in learning how to cross-country ski, you can do that for free, right? Iowa City, you can't do this for free. But in Ames, you have a free cross-country skiing clinic this Saturday, 1 o'clock. It's free. And
Does it cost anything, Tim?
and so you can check out the Parks and Rec. There's no registration required, but it's encouraged so we can have a head count. Monday, very excited. We have our community in Story County MLK celebration. That program will be in the city auditorium. The program begins at 6:30. Cookies are served at 6 o'clock. So please come at 6. It is a fantastic event. And a little personal frustration I want to share is that I have no idea why the Iowa caucuses are scheduled on the day of a national holiday. This makes no sense to me. I don't know who to write letters to. I'm going to find someone to write letters to. So Dr. King worked hard to advance voting rights. And we're having the Iowa caucus where people have to choose between coming to celebrate Dr. King and exercise their rights in the caucus. So as one council member, I'm expressing my outer amazement that we're asking Iowans to make that choice. I'm going to the MLK celebration Monday night. Thanks.
I agree with Tim about the caucus and MLK Day conflict, and I was appalled when I heard about that scheduling. At the beginning of the meeting tonight, I think we heard something in public forum that is important for us to keep in mind, and that is as we seek to engage our residents better, we have to take into account that not everyone is a computer user. And so as we look for those other means of getting in touch with our community members, we need to also be looking at those non-traditional, or perhaps they are traditional methods of communication, face-to-face, and information that is posted in locations and seeks input that way. I also was curious, and I don't know what to do with the second public comment that we heard. It seemed to me that there were two issues there. One of them sounded like it was not directed at Public Works and their plowing, but at a private plowing company hired by someone. And I thought that we had covered that in our property maintenance code adjustments, unless we removed it at some point.
No, it's in there.
And I'm wondering if that is something that we could convey to Greg Carlson.
Actually, John Joyner gave multiple business cards to the gentleman and asked him to contact him.
Okay.
So I think that there's going to be some follow-up by city staff already on that. So I'm sure that he'll look at the ordinance, and maybe Mark could touch base with John also. And if there is some legal standing now with that, that could be communicated to him also. So
Yeah, I wasn't sure why John was talking to him. And it seemed like maybe it was because he thought it was the Public Works contractors doing the pushing of the snow, which sometimes we get complaints about. But I do hope that we will convey that there is now a mechanism for addressing that.
Yeah, I think it's just great to have staff that are willing to provide public service. And if it's not a city issue, at least they probably can direct them to maybe where to check in and, or put them in contact with Mark or with others to just find out what can be done.
The other portion of his comment was confusing to me. I didn't know about the reduction in size of trees on the plaza, and I'm wondering if that is actually true.
It's the first I personally have heard of it.
First time I've heard of it.
So if it's not true, then I have no issues with that. Those are my comments and questions.
All right, very good. And I would just echo what Tim and Gloria said. It's very disheartening. And I too will be at the MLK, both offering welcome comments, but going to stay there with for the whole session. And it's just a worthwhile, and I just appreciate all the efforts that are put into it. It's usually incredibly encouraging and uplifting. So I encourage everyone to go. It starts at, you mentioned the rate, 6:30.
6:30 for the program.
Program.
At 6.
So anyway.
Let's hope for good weather.
Yeah. And next week, council, we're going to have a meet again and start with our CIP workshops. So that should be very interesting. Do you want to just give us a little update of when or how they can access that to look at it before they come?
I think we'll be ready to send it to the public. Friday, we'll have the whole document posted. And then we'll have hard copies for you all too. In addition, you'll be able to download it to your computer, but you'll have hard copies on Tuesday.
And just to close with, in an ongoing effort to communicate with our state legislators regarding impact of legislation that was passed last year, Steve and Corey and I are going down to meet with a state representative and a senator that are very interested in seeing the impact it's having on our community. And so Corey and I spent some time this afternoon talking about things to present. Not going down there to whine. We're going down there to just share the impact and hopefully encourage them to leave well enough alone for a few years and let this thing all shake out. But we'll let you know how that goes on the backside of that. So anyway, with that, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move we adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.